They shot his wife right in his arms, but that was their biggest mistake. Two racist cops pull up and see a big black man holding a bleeding woman. They don't ask questions, they point guns at him, ignore his cries for help, and then they fire. Unaware they just shot the wife of a highly trained Navy SEAL. What happens next will shock you. It happened on a Tuesday. The kind of clear, dry afternoon that makes you forget the world can be cruel. Tobias Rains wasn't just any man. He was a 6 feet 4 inches tower of quiet strength. Skin like polished oak. Eyes sharp enough to read the soul. But what most people didn't see, and certainly what two Hartsfield officers didn't care to know, was that Tobias was a highly decorated Navy SEAL. A man who'd saved American lives in deserts, jungles, and oceans. But in his own country, all they saw was a threat. Tobias was cradling his wife, Lena Rains, as blood soaked through her white shirt. A bright, terrifying red stain grew by the second. She'd collapsed in his arms seconds earlier, whispering, "Baby, it hurts." He had just managed to dial 911. That's when they pulled up. Squad car lights flashing. Sirens slicing through the heat. Officers Craig Denton and Zachary Mott had been driving by when they saw Tobias leaning over Lena's bloody body. They didn't ask questions. They didn't even park. They leapt out with guns drawn, screaming commands, spitting words like bullets. "Drop her. Hands where we can see him. Don't move or we'll shoot." Tobias stood, trembling, not from fear, but from fury. His voice cracked but held firm. "She's shot. She needs help. I said drop her." Lena's eyes fluttered. She was fading fast. "Toby," she whispered, blood seeping from her ribs. And that's when it happened. Bang! Officer Denton's hand slipped, or so he claimed later, and the gun went off. A second bullet tore through Lena's shoulder. Her body convulsed in Tobias's arms. That sound, it was louder than war. Louder than any battlefield Tobias had fought on. It was personal. He fell to his knees, holding her tight as tears burned his cheeks. "No, no, and no," he roared. But the officers kept shouting, guns still raised, faces twisted in panic and power. They still hadn't called for help. They still thought he was the problem. And in that moment, they didn't see Tobias Rains, the man who risked his life for America. They saw a black man with muscles and blood on his shirt. And that, to them, was enough. 6 hours earlier, Tobias and Lena had been driving back from a weekend retreat. A peaceful cabin up in the Smoky Mountains. Their anniversary. 10 years strong. Lena had picked out a vintage R&B playlist, and Tobias, always the quieter one, just smiled and drove, his hand resting on hers the whole way. They were happy. They stopped at that gas station to grab a drink and fuel up. Lena went inside. Tobias stayed to pump gas. That's when the robbery started. A teenage boy, skinny, frantic, and armed, stormed in with a hoodie pulled low over his face. He wasn't from Hartsfield. Probably not even from Georgia. He demanded cash. Lena froze. When the cashier hesitated, the boy panicked. Fired a wild shot. The bullet ricocheted. It hit Lena in the side. By the time Tobias rushed in, the boy was gone. Lena was bleeding out on the floor. He picked her up, carried her to the open air, and called for help. But instead of help, the police brought guns. At the police station, their report read like this. The male suspect was aggressive, refused to comply, appeared threatening. We feared for our lives. They left out the part where Lena was already shot before they arrived. They left out how they never called for an ambulance. And they definitely left out the part where the man they threatened was Lieutenant Tobias Rains, U.S. Navy SEAL, Bronze Star recipient, and trauma response expert. They just wrote, black, big, non-compliant. Tobias didn't throw a punch. He didn't raise his voice again. He didn't resist. Instead, he made one call. Not to a lawyer. Not to a friend. He called his commanding officer. "They shot my wife, sir. And I want justice, the right way." That same night, a team of military legal officers arrived in town. And suddenly, the game changed. The cops who thought they'd get away with another unfortunate incident now found themselves under a microscope. Body cam footage disappeared. But Tobias's gas station car dash cam? Crystal clear. The footage showed everything. Tobias cradling Lena. Officers drawing without warning. The moment they shot a woman who was already dying. It went viral in hours. Hashtag Code Red Justice. And right now, this is important. If you're still watching this and your heart's pounding, do me one favor. Tobias Rains wasn't just a soldier. He was a man with nothing left to lose. And a mission, expose the truth. Tobias Reigns didn't scream. He didn't riot. He didn't punch a single wall. He strategized. Because that's what Navy SEALs do. They assess, they adapt, and they strike back smart. While Lena lay in the hospital in critical condition, tubes in her nose, monitors beeping like a slow drumbeat of death, Tobias sat outside her room, building a war plan with calm, deadly precision. The cops who shot his wife were counting on silence. But Tobias wasn't raised like that. Wait a second. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this. The footage from his dashboard cam, high-definition front-row proof, was already in the hands of JAG attorneys, civil rights groups, and one ruthless journalist named Shayla Boone. Shayla wasn't just looking for a headline. Her brother had been beaten by cops 2 years ago. No charges. No justice. She'd waited for her moment. And Tobias Reigns just gave her a nuke. Her article hit within 24 hours. The SEAL they tried to shoot. How 2 cops almost killed the wrong man's wife. It was everywhere. Cable news. Twitter. Facebook. The image? Tobias on his knees, Lena in his arms, blood all over her, and a cop pointing a gun at his face. America saw it. And America chose sides. Officer Denton lawyered up fast. Officer Mott doubled down, said Tobias was non-compliant. They held a press conference with their department, using every buzzword in the book. Reasonable fear. Rapid escalation. Tragic misidentification. But Tobias didn't speak at that press conference. He waited. He waited until Lena opened her eyes. He held her hand and whispered, "They're going to pay. I swear." Lena nodded, barely able to speak. But her eyes? Fire. The lawsuit Tobias filed wasn't just civil, it was surgical. He sued the officers for attempted manslaughter, the department for misconduct, the city for racial negligence. But it wasn't about the money. Tobias didn't want a payout. He wanted a permanent stain on their records. He wanted laws changed. He wanted to make sure this never happened again. The courtroom was packed. Lena testified, fragile but fiery. Her bloodstained shirt was presented as evidence. Then Tobias took the stand. He wore his full dress blues, medals gleaming, spine straight. The jury couldn't take their eyes off him. "I've led operations in enemy territory," he told them. "I've stared down men with machine guns. But I've never been more afraid than when 2 American officers pointed weapons at me while I was holding my bleeding wife, because they thought I looked dangerous." Silence. Then gasps. Then quiet tears. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. When they returned, their faces were stone. Guilty. Both officers were found liable for excessive force and racial profiling. Officer Denton lost his badge, permanently. Mott was suspended indefinitely and placed under federal investigation. But that wasn't the real win. 2 months later, Georgia passed the Reigns Law, requiring all responding officers to render medical aid before engaging force, and mandating immediate review of racial bias complaints by a third-party civilian board. Tobias didn't stop there. He launched a nonprofit called Red Doesn't Lie, focused on protecting Black veterans and their families from discrimination. And Lena? She walked again. She stood beside him at the first press event, scars still healing, voice still soft. But when she spoke, people listened. "My husband was trained to kill, but he chose to forgive." And that's what real power looks like. Before you scroll away, let me ask you something. If this story moved you, if it made your chest tighten, your blood boil, or your heart race, then hit that subscribe button right now. We tell stories that matter. And this one proves something the world needs to remember. Being a hero doesn't mean raising a fist. Sometimes it means never lowering your principles.